For the sake of those out in computer land who share our service through that instrument, I'll make an introduction of the one who's preaching today, who is our Perkins intern, member of this church, and when she gets through with her internship, she'll be officially a part of the staff of this church. And here's Mary Teague.
Thank you, Max. That sounds all official, doesn't it?
Very official. Yeah. Very, very official.
Good morning. Jim announced to you guys that we will be having a work day on April 28th. Thank you, sir. And he announced to you that the sign-up sheet would be in the back, but I know you, and I know you'll try to sneak out.
She knows you.
So the sign-up sheet's going to start right here in the front. So our work day is April 28th. I have a column here for an indoor crew, a column here for an outdoor crew. I have a list of things for us to get done. If you have anything you would like to add to the list, please write it down here on the bottom, but know that if you suggest something, you better be here. All right? All right, so I'm going to start right here. And if anybody needs a ride, if you'll put your name on there, we'll be glad to come pick you up. Thank you, sir.
Mm-hmm.
And Max announced to you that I'll be graduating soon. Whew, man, 23 days till my last final. I need your prayers until then because I have senioritis so bad. I don't want to do anything that has anything to do with school. I don't want to drive over there to go to class. I don't want to read anything or write anything else. And I have 3 papers still to do and a test. So please pray for me. I made the mistake of putting my golf clubs in my car. And so when the day is beautiful, the golf clubs are right there. Anyway, so yeah, it's almost over. 4 years. So for about the last 6 months, I have been earnestly praying for God to show me what God intends to do with all of this. I'm very blessed to have been able to attend school. I sit in those classrooms and I think about what a spoiled brat I am. There are people that I've visited with and people that I've seen and people all over the world who don't have groceries in their refrigerators and don't have a car to drive to get to a job that they need. And people who live in fear of a bomb being dropped or a sniper bullet going off. And I'm sitting in a university classroom. And so it's been a very humbling experience for me. Being in the seminary changed me at the core of who I am. And so I've been asking God, really, do you want me to be a nurse? Do you want me to be a pastor? What am I supposed to do with all of this? Now, many of you have ideas about how I should pursue my calling. Doug says I should just sit down and be quiet, mostly. And I appreciate your input. I do very much. I appreciate your input, maybe except for that one. But I do. I appreciate you being able to recognize in me the things that I don't see, the things that I need to improve on, the things that I have a passion for, and I'm thankful to you for your support in these last 4 years and for all your help through this. But I'm still trying to discern what God has in mind for me. Now, this week at school, I had to read a book by Dean William Lawrence. And the name of the book is Ordained Ministry in the United Methodist Church. And I just want to read to you one thing that he says about ordained ministry. One who is called is sent to a place, perhaps a neighborhood in a specific city, in which a local church may be available as the base of missionary operations for that region. One is not simply called to care for a congregation. One is sent as an apostle of the risen Lord for discipling and transforming that territory. Now, caring for a congregation is not simple. Don't let me say that whatsoever. Max was sent to the mission field of this church in this neighborhood. He was sent here to close down this church because the membership had fallen off, and because there were other churches in the neighborhood. And the United Methodist Church moves people around and closes churches and opens churches based on the needs in that neighborhood. And so Max was not sent here to sustain this church, but because of his hard work and because of his dedication and because of the people in this church, look where we are 35 years later. Our average Sunday school attendance is going up. Not Sunday school, our average church attendance is going up. Our average Sunday school attendance is going up too, now that we have a new Sunday school teacher. We've added another Sunday school class. And so this church is growing and thriving in this neighborhood. The other thing in Dean Lawrence's book that I found very interesting is that there are 3 criteria that the United Methodist Church uses to determine if a new church has actually been established. The first thing is that there's an identifiable community that meets regularly for worship. And so here we are all easily identifiable. We meet here every Sunday for worship. The next thing is an outreach into the neighborhood focused on the underserved or at-risk populations in the area. And Beth and Chris aren't here today, but we are very active with East Side Ministries. So it's not just our church, but it's a group of, I think there's 13 churches on the east side of Fort Worth, go east side, on the east side of Fort Worth that are very active in the community here. And so we're involved in that way also. And the third thing is a civic improvement activity, which includes a counseling center, might include a shelter for abused women, or even an after-school reading program for children. And so through East Side Ministries, we also meet that criteria as well. So for the last 6 months, I've been trying to figure out with God, what are we going to do, Lord? Where are we going after this? The school is trying to get me to go ahead and sign up and become a student of the doctoral program there, and I'm just ignoring all their calls and letters because the thought of going back to school right now is just more than I can bear. But I've been praying. So for the last 6 months then, when you pray for something, God's going to answer you. And you need to be listening, because for the last 6 months, God has been showing me exactly what God intended for me to do. You remember in January, I went to Houston. I spent a week in Houston with the chaplains there in the hospital in Houston. And I learned about God's presence in a whole new light. And I learned about being in exile and what that meant to be separated from everything, and how exile sometimes also is a tool for preparation. But I didn't get that nudge. I didn't catch it. So then in March I went to Cuba. And in Cuba I met 3 women. I met Berta, Tomasa, and Juana. And I have to tell you that they stole my heart. Now, these 3 ladies, they're senior citizens. Only they don't call themselves senior citizens. They just said to me, Mary, we're just more experienced than you are. These 3 ladies live in an apartment complex in a poor part of Matanzas, Cuba. And every Wednesday night they have what they call their home church, or it's also called a prayer home. And they meet together, these 3 ladies and about 6 or 7 other people from that neighborhood, and they meet together on Wednesday nights, and they have a Bible study, and they have prayer time where they listen to prayer requests, and then they sing a little bit, and then they pray again. And then at 8:55 in the evening, they wrap everything up, because at 9 o'clock, the soap opera comes on from Brazil. And they don't get a lot of television there in Cuba, but they get that soap opera from Brazil. And so we had to be finished with our home church service that evening. But let me tell you something else about these women. In Cuba, only about 10% of the population is under the age of 18. Now, think about that. That under 18 in about 20 years is going to be the people who are the backbone of the economy there. And there aren't very many of them. The other interesting thing about the population in Cuba is that 45% of them are over the age of 65. Many of their children, who would be the earners and the workers and the backbone of the economy between the ages of 20 and 64, have left the country because there aren't really opportunities there for them to work. Now, there's free education. You can get a free education in Cuba. You can get 4 years of college and a graduate degree for free. Now they tell me. But once you get that graduate degree, the jobs are very hard to come by, and so many of those young people, they get those graduate degrees and they go someplace else. And so these seniors then are left in their neighborhoods and in their homes and in their towns, and they're left alone. Their children call, they send packages, they send money, they do what they can, but they're left alone. You can't just jump on a plane and fly to Cuba. And so if not for these little neighborhood churches, if not for these church homes, my 3 new friends here, they'd never get a hug from anybody all week long. They might not even get to talk to anybody. And so I sat there in their home that day and I listened to them talk. And each of them belongs to a different church in the neighborhood. And all of the churches in the neighborhood have a meal once a week to feed those folks in that neighborhood. And so they walk to each other's churches on Mondays and Tuesdays and Thursdays so that they can share in that fellowship together. But if not for the presence of the Christian church in this Cuban neighborhood and in a multitude of Cuban neighborhoods like this, there wouldn't be any social interaction for these seniors. And I thought about that as I left their home that night. And I know this is going to be hard for you guys to believe, but it made me cry. It made me want to just gather them up and bring them home, because they were just such beautiful people. In a few weeks, I've got some pictures that I'm going to show you, and some of the pictures are of them. They just have the most beautiful, joyful smiles. But you know, I went to Cuba and I met my 3 new friends. And then I still came home asking God, well, now what are we going to do? Now I want to go to Cuba and be a missionary. I can't go to Houston and be a chaplain and go to Cuba and be a missionary and live in my home in Fort Worth and be with my St. Matthew family. What am I going to do with all this, God? So then last Wednesday, because I wasn't listening, at 4 in the morning, someone used my checking account to buy almost $500 worth of something from Best Buy. It's amazing. I didn't mind so much. Everybody, we're all at risk for that. It's just the way it is. It's where we live now. People can figure out a way to break the law, and so they do. So what I was mad about that day is that when I called my credit union and said to them, why did you approve this charge at 4 in the morning for Best Buy in Minnesota? And the poor young lady on the phone who happened to answer when I called that day said, well, Miss Teague, we're very sorry. We're really very sorry. But you know, we have no control over what money goes in and out of here. I realized at that point I was talking to the wrong human. But there wasn't anything they could do. So I got in my car at 3:30 in the afternoon, and I'm trying to drive from Arlington to Fort Worth because I'm going to go to the credit union because I have to get a new debit card, because they had to, the security had to shut down my debit card, right? And I'm thinking, I'm so mad. I'm thinking of all the things that are tied to my debit card, all the automatic things that come out that I don't even think about because they just come out, right? Well, they're not going to come out anymore. So I got to go and mess with all of that. And I'm driving along in the middle of the lane down I-30, and I'm so mad. And I look over, and walking down the side of the road are two ladies. And they're obviously older ladies, more experienced ladies. And they're carrying some plastic grocery sacks. And they're just moving along as best they can. And I see them, and instinctively I look and I start to turn on my blinkers so that I can pull over and pick them up. But I'm in the middle lane and I couldn't get over. And so I kept driving. And I hadn't gone 100 yards past them. And God said to me, Mary, I need you to pick them up. But Lord, I got to go get this debit card. I don't have time. If I stop to pick them up, the bank's going to close. Mary, I need you to go pick them up. But Lord, I got to get home and study. I have things to do. I don't have time for this. Mary, I need you to go pick them up. So I exited the highway, and I turned around, and I drove back, and I turned around again, and there they were, and I pulled over, and I picked up these two ladies. Margaret and Delia. Margaret's 67 years old. Delia's in her 50s. Margaret was wearing clothes that she'd had on for a few days. And her hair hadn't been washed in a while. But man, she had a smile on her face. I'm so glad to see you. It's so hot out here. And Miss Delia, all she could do was mumble because she's had a stroke. And she couldn't talk. And so as I introduced myself to these ladies, Margaret said to me, my name is Margaret, and this is my friend Delia. We've been out here on these streets for about 5 years now. We've been out here together for about 5 years now. So I put them in my car, and as we're driving down the street, I said to them, where are you ladies coming from? Margaret said, you know, we both got discharged from the hospital this morning in Dallas. And we waited for a couple of hours, but our ride didn't come. And so we started walking because we couldn't stay at the hospital. Who does that? Who puts a 70-year-old woman out on the street? Because their ride didn't show up. That's between me and the hospital system that let them go, so I'm talking to them. Anyway, nobody came to pick them up. And I said to her, you guys have walked from Dallas? She said, no. She said, a young man in Grand Prairie stopped, and he took us and bought us lunch, and he drove us to the edge of Arlington, and then he had to get back to work. That's as far as he could go. And I said, well, thank God for that one young man. And Margaret said, thank God. And then Margaret said, my name's Margaret, and this is Delia. And we've been out here on this road these streets for about 5 years. But we've been together. And 2 or 3 more times during our conversation, she introduced herself to me again. And I realized that she wasn't just a 67-year-old woman on the streets with no home, but she had dementia. And she was trying her best to take care of her friend who'd had a stroke. And they had each other. And this young man that stopped and picked them up took them to the dollar store, and the bags they were carrying were full of sweet rolls and beef jerky and chips and peanut butter crackers and food for them. And so I said to them, are you thirsty? Right? Because I've read Matthew 25. I know what it says. Give them something to drink. And so we stopped at the Shell station at Oakland and I-30. And as we pull up there, there's a Motel 6 in the parking lot. And I'm thinking, oh, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to go rent a hotel room for these ladies and let them get a shower and let them get some clean clothes and get them some food. And I'm going to do the right thing by these ladies. And then I remembered I don't have a debit card. Because somebody has a new TV in Minnesota. So I bought them some water and I bought them a Diet Coke because that's what they wanted. And we got back in the car and I said to them, ladies, where can I take you? And so they had me drive them to the night shelter in Fort Worth, to the Presbyterian night shelter. Margaret said they'd been there before. So I took them there, pulled up in the parking lot. We got all their stuff out of the car. They hugged my neck. They said thank you. And they went and made a little place in the shade to sit and wait for the shelter to open at 6 o'clock. And so I drove away sobbing. And I drove away with a clarity about what God intends for me to do with my life. And so I didn't hear the call in Houston because I wasn't quiet enough to let it sink in. And as soon as I felt it, I started making plans, and God said, no, that's not it, Mary. And I didn't hear the call in Cuba because I got so busy and started making plans for what it was going to look like that I didn't hear it. And so God sent me 2 humans to say to me, my name is Margaret and this is Delia, and we've been on these streets for 5 years. And you picked us up. So there was a young ruler in the days of Jesus who said to him, Lord, it says in the Bible to love your neighbor as yourself, but who is my neighbor? And Jesus said to him, a certain man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho, and he fell among robbers, and they stripped him and beat him and went away, leaving him half dead. And just by chance, a certain priest was going down on that road, and when he saw him, he passed by on the other side. And likewise, a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, he passed by on the other side. But a certain Samaritan who was on a journey came upon him, and when he saw him, he felt compassion. And he came to him and bandaged up his wounds, pouring oil and wine on them. And he put him on his own beast and brought him to an inn and took care of him. And on the next day he took out 2 denarii and gave them to the innkeeper and said, take care of him, and whatever more you spend, when I return, I will repay you. Now, I wish I could tell you that my whole little thing with Margaret and Delia, that makes me the Good Samaritan. But it doesn't. I went a little way. I stopped and picked them up. I got a little bit of water for them. I drove them a few more miles. But I didn't do what the Good Samaritan did. Look at what he says. Look at what it says. He stayed in the inn with this man. He put him in the inn, and then he spent the night. He stayed till the next day to make sure that he was going to be okay. The other thing he did, he took oil and wine and he bandaged his wounds. And he had physical contact with him. And he touched his life. Now, the Good Samaritan had business of his own to take care of, right? He went to take care of his own personal business. He didn't blow off his own responsibilities, but he made sure somebody else was helping this man who'd been beaten and robbed. I wish I could tell you I was like the Good Samaritan, but God had to tell me 3 times to go pick him up. I'm more like the people in the rest of this chapter, like Mary and Martha. in the next section. Mary's sitting at the feet of Jesus just worshiping and praying. Man, I love to do that. I just love to worship and to pray. You'll find me many times driving down the highway I found a new album by Zach Williams called Chain Breaker, and man, I turn it up and I roll down the windows and I sing. I'm telling you, people must think I'm crazy, but I do. I just love to spend that time worshiping and praying and singing, and I'll sing in the car all day long and not subject any of you to it. Sometimes though, I'm like Martha. You guys remember the story? Mary's sitting at Martha's feet, at Jesus' feet, and Martha's going to Jesus saying, hey, how come Mary's not helping me? How come Mary's not working? Sometimes I'm Martha too. Sometimes I'm wondering, why isn't somebody helping me? And while in the middle of all of this, while everything else is going on in here this week, I'm learning about ecclesiology, which is the study of being the church. And I'm reading all these things about what the church is supposed to be. And I have to write a paper about how the United Methodist Church is supposed to be this big global church to the world, reaching past age and gender and citizenship and financial status and education. And then I think about Margaret and Delia, and I wonder, where is the church for them? Where is this big, giant, global church that's going to take care of these kinds of people? Where are they? Well, for Margaret and Delia, the church was the Presbyterian night shelter. The Presbyterians are in that neighborhood. Max's sermon last week from Philippians. It's a letter from Paul to the church at Philippi, giving them instructions for what a church should look like. It said, don't be selfish or conceited. Excuse me. Be humble. Regarding each other is more important than yourself. Don't just think about yourself, also think about others. You can live and be obedient to what Jesus said when he says, love your neighbor as yourselves. You can live like that. It doesn't have to be me first, but it could also be me too, because you've got to take care of yourself as well. You got to empty yourselves for others according to that letter from Paul. Sacrifice your time and your talent. Give up some of your excess for other people. You're my hero. Some tree just flew into the back of my throat. I don't know what happened. Sorry. How many of you go out to eat for lunch during the week? Right? So I started paying attention at the hospital. I spend about $8 on a meal. If I just once a week put that money in an envelope instead of spending it on food and took my own lunch, got up early enough to prepare my own lunch from all the groceries I have in my house, in 50 weeks I could save $400 to give to someone else. Just one meal a week. What about the time you spend with your eyes on a screen? The studies show now that the average adult spends 6 to 8 hours a day looking at a screen. A day. That's like a full-time job. Looking at a screen. That's 42 hours a week. What if you just took 4 of those hours and spent it serving? What if you just took a little time to read to children? There are 4 elementary schools in this area, all Title I elementary schools, right? Isn't that what they call it, Title I? Underserved? You could spend a little time putting a grab bar up in a bathroom for someone who has trouble getting up and down in the bathrooms. You could spend 4 hours a week picking up somebody for church who can't drive to church anymore. There are thousands of ways that we can serve. And you know what? When I look at that letter to Paul and I think about Margaret and Delia and I realize God's call on my life, I realize we are that church in Philippi. We are the church that is not selfish. We do have these outreaches. We're already living this way. We comfort each other. We love each other. We've collected money for people who need money. We're picking up people for church and bringing them to church. We are doing these things. We are being the church that Paul said he needed us to be. So my calling then is to be the church outside of the walls of this church, in this neighborhood. We've already got a list of everything we need to do. Matthew 25 gives us the list. You feed them, you give them something to drink, you give them clothes, you give them shelter. You visit them when they're in the hospital, when they're in prison. Be the hands and feet of Christ to them. And so my focus after graduation will be all of the members of this church, because I still love you all very much and want to serve you. But it's also going to be this community, this 2-mile radius. We're going to start in a 2-mile. You say, I said we. When I graduate, we have work to do. 2-mile radius around this church. We're going to find out what resources are available. We're going to find out what ministries are already going on. We're not going to recreate the wheel. We're not going to try to reinvent being Christians, because it's already going on in this neighborhood. Now, I don't know how else to approach this except as a nurse, even though it's my calling and my ministry. In the nursing process, you assess things first. And so we're going to figure out where we are and what we have and what we need to do. I had to do a contextual study for my internship. So I had to get a report about the neighborhoods, and it's within a 5-mile radius of this church, but it includes age, education level, financial status, housing, how many churches there are in the neighborhood, how many bars there are in the neighborhood, how many check cashing places, and car title note. Because those two industries have a tendency to manipulate the very vulnerable in our population. And so I have this contextual study, so I'm going to pare it down a little bit so that we can really look at it and assess where we are and what we need to do. And then we're going to get organized. We're going to see what's already going on. And we're going to make a plan of action, and we're going to share the work with other people. Because in the 5-mile radius around this church, there are more than 60 other churches within 5 miles. And so there are plenty. Just if you stood on the back, where's the back? If you stood on the back side of this church and you threw a rock as hard as you could right over there across this catty corner, across this property, there's 2 huge churches right over there. I never saw them until the road said detour. I never even knew they were there. There's a huge Church of God and a huge Baptist church. Right down the street from us, there's a Unitarian church and a Lutheran church. There are plenty of people around here to share the work with. We've just got to get out there and get our hands dirty and get outside the doors of this church. And we're going to measure everything we do, because that's what nurses do. You know, we have to make sure what we're doing works. And so we're going to measure it against Matthew 25. Are we feeding them? Are we making sure they have clean water to drink? Are we making sure they have clothes to wear and shelter over their heads? Now, this may not be comfortable sometimes. We're going to have to stretch ourselves a little bit. But I've never been more sure of my call than I am this week. And when I read what Dean Lawrence says about the church already being there in the neighborhood, available, because the mission field is not in this room. The mission field is out these doors. I want to read you one last thing from Dean Lawrence. What the church needs is an ordained ministry that is empowered to look outward more than inward, to see the world as an arena for mission, not as an environment in which to seek comfort. to exercise not only the biblical mandate of pastor, but also the biblical mandate of prophet, to transform what is evil in the world, not merely condemn it, and to tell the truth of the gospel and reconcile others to it. The truth of the gospel, folks, happened on the side of a hill when Jesus spoke peace and comfort to thousands who were gathered there. And then you know what he did after the Sermon on the Mount? What came next? He fed them. And they had fellowship together. And that's the church. Jesus told them that day, "You're the light of the world. Let your light shine before humanity in such a way that they may see your good works." St. Matthew is the light in this neighborhood. St. Matthew is the light on the east side of Fort Worth. Join me, please, in prayer. God of grace and glory, let us love not in word or speech, but in truth and action. Teach us, good Lord, to serve you as you deserve, to give and not to count the cost, to fight and not to heed the wounds, to toil and not to seek for rest, to labor and not to ask for any reward except that of knowing that we do your will. Through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.